I think I will sit here, if that's okay. There's not much else place to be. So I think I know most of you in the audience, and I think most of you know me a bit. So I'm here to talk about music competitions, or as Bartok called them, horse races. Why do we do them? What are they? And what can we learn from them? And what might we do? So I'll start off by giving a short history of competitions, how they have changed. Then I'll talk about my experience with them, and then I will leave the floor open for questions. So, as long as we've had music, such as any other form of art, there have been kind of competitions between a few people to see who was the greatest sculptor in ancient Greece. There were competitions between singers. There were competitions between Beethoven and other pianists in Vienna. Steibelt was one of them. Beethoven won because of his improvisation. But the competition as we know it today started after the First World War in Europe. It was really a way of showing national pride. Sort of, we could find the best Polish pianist, the best Russian pianist, the best Bulgarian pianist, and or other instrumentalists. I'm a pianist, so I know more about the piano competitions. And little by little, every country had their competition. And we had the Chopin competition in Poland, which was one of the first ones. And this is an unusual competition because it is the only one that you may only play the works of this composer. However, since the turn of the 21st century, the amount of competitions has gone from 60 to over 300. This means that there are so many more opportunities to take part in a competition, but also it makes it more difficult to say, oh, I'm a competition prize winner. Do I have a career? So when there used to be competitions before 2000, you would have 100 people turn up. They hadn't sent a video, they hadn't sent a recording, they just said, I'd like to take part. And the jury would be allowed to stop them, and they'd have to play the same repertoire as everybody else. Often in violin competitions, there was a white circle drawn on the floor, and if you moved outside of that white circle while you were playing, you were eliminated, because they had to find ways of eliminating people and not boring the jury with 100 performances. And they would often stop people within a minute or so, as still happens in voice competitions. And these competitions were very difficult because once you'd played and if you didn't get through, you really had no support afterwards. Whereas if you were in the final, your name was well known across Europe and Asia and also America. So you got guaranteed a career. But since 2000, even the prize winners of the Chopin and the Queen Elizabeth and the Tchaikovsky sometimes have difficulty because they say that people are thinking that other competitions, there's lots of prize winners. Why should these competitions still be as important? And in one way, they're correct, because there are so many competitions now, there are so many prize winners, we have to find different ways. But also, something different happened with the birth of the CD. With the birth of the CD, recording became commonplace. Anybody could do it. But also, even if you played lots of wrong notes, you could just edit them out. If you listen to performances from early competitions, there were lots of wrong notes. But if you listen to a competition today, there are no wrong notes. So what happens is that the finalists of the major piano competitions and violin competitions, they play perfectly, but they may not inspire you. And this is why often the big competition prize winners do not have a great career, because nobody wants to go and hear them. But when one plays an instrument or sings, every choice you make is either towards perfection and having less interest, or having more interest and less perfection. And you therefore have to choose where you want to put your playing on this spectrum, if you can. If you don't feel you can play interestingly, then you have to go for perfection. And if you don't feel that you can play perfectly, you have to go for interest. And often I have a lot of friends who say, I don't want to do competitions because I know I will not get anywhere. So for me, when I do a competition, it is not about getting a prize. For me, I know that I belong to the more interest kind of player rather than the perfect kind of player. So for me, a competition is an opportunity to try and make my playing as clean and as perfect as possible, while retaining all the things that will make an audience listen. And the other thing is, there are lots of different competitions, and you have to listen to the other prize winners. Some of them you might think, oh, I really don't like that playing. If you don't like that playing, probably that competition you won't get very far, because for the Geza Anda, for example, that I have won second prize at, it's very much focused on playing the great works of classical repertoire very well. This is something that I like to do. Whereas I haven't done the Van Cliburn, which is all about being a perfect showman. I don't like playing like that, and so that wouldn't work for me. So it's very important that you choose the competitions that you do if you want to do them, because otherwise you might get disappointed, and it's not your fault because they just don't appreciate your kind of playing. Every jury is different. And also, a trend that is happening in piano competitions at the moment is that they do not give the prizes to the people who are interesting or that make the best music. These are very much instrument competitions. The person who plays the violin the best, the person who plays the piano the best, the person that plays the bassoon the best wins the competition. So that's another factor that you have to take into consideration. The jury has a difficult task because we can listen to 3 or 5 performances, but then after about 6, we are human beings. We forget what the earlier ones were like. And actually, if you play later on in a piano competition, it's much better. If you play early on, they're likely to forget you. And also, you have to look as comfortable as possible. They did a study of a couple of thousand people. They had video clips of 5 finalists from the Queen Elizabeth competition. And they had them just video, just audio, or audio and video. With the audio clips only, musicians couldn't rank them, and the public could not rank them. With audio and video, the public could not rank them, but the musicians could. Not all musicians, but most musicians could. But just the video alone they could give the exact order 90% of the time, public and musicians. Because how you look on stage, how you present yourself, what you wear, and how easy it looks for you to play are some of the most important things. You obviously have to play well, but if you play well and you look like this, or if you play well and you look like this, they're going to choose the person who looks like this because, firstly, they're less likely to have injuries and they look like they're enjoying it. And a jury is looking for moments of magic, moments where they don't have to worry about what the notes are, just that they're holding their breath and they don't want it to stop. So, in a nutshell, competitions, you have to choose whether it's for you, but also, when you do them, you have to use it as an opportunity for self-improvement, rather than thinking, I'm going to win some money or I'm going to be famous. Because that is more done by having contacts, by writing to people, by meeting people, by being interesting. If you meet somebody and you think, well, this person plays very well, keep in contact with them, play with them again, because the human contact is still what makes this world go around. And a competition may help that, because you might be on Medici TV and have 6 million views. So 6 million people, hopefully some of them musicians, and you'll play with them. But in the main, competitions can be good, they can be bad. They're not for everybody, but I would heartily suggest doing them, but just don't get your hopes up. Thank you. Any questions?
Please.
How did you prepare mentally for the challenge of being told what you're going to play only half an hour before going on stage? How did you prepare previously the months to that? How do you deal with such a pressure? Because with Chopin, at least you know your repertoire. With this, with Gesang, it's...
Well, so for example, the Gesang, it's 5.5 hours of repertoire. Any competition I go to, because I'm trying to really show myself to my best, I know all the repertoire very well beforehand. I've played it many years and it all feels very comfortable. I try not to think of playing at a competition any different as playing at a concert. I'm not trying to play it perfectly. Yes, I've practiced to try and play it perfectly, but when I'm on stage, I'm just trying to communicate the music with the audience, because that's the most important thing. But the other thing for me is that every competition is a different experience. I just took part in the Leeds piano competition with 2 weeks of notice. I hadn't practiced the piano for a month beforehand, and so I was rusty. I had 4 hours of repertoire, and I had 2 weeks. I got to the final. So it's sort of, you have to know, you can't set yourself a limit. You have to always see how to get better and where to get better. But one very important thing, in the month before you go to a competition, play the program as much as you can to as many different people as you can, because everybody has something to say. Even though they may not agree with how you play it, it will give you insight as to what works and what doesn't work.
What do you think about the balance of practicing in a week before the competition? Do you change that? Or because, you know, there have been studies of musical medicine that suggest, you know, having the large part of practice already done months, of course, before the competition, or and to gradually decrease the amount of practice to the competition. Do you have such a scheme, or do you stick to your habits until the competition?
Well, I stick to my habits, firstly because I believe that my habits work for me, but also because I do not practice as much as a lot of other people do. Whenever I see my friends, they say, oh, I've done 8 hours of practice today, or I've done 10 hours of practice today. I never do more than 4 hours of practice. I can do more than 4 hours of rehearsal, that's different, but never, ever more than 4 hours of practice, because the practice needs to be of the highest quality. Firstly, you're not going to be concentrated enough, but secondly, you can easily injure yourself, and especially if you change the amount of work that you normally do, and you are under a stressful situation, you are likely to injure yourself. A number of the people who I know went to a competition, started practicing 12, 14 hours a day, which is even more than they usually did, and they just couldn't play once they got there because they had injured themselves or they were in too much pain. So you need to have a normal amount of practice which then carries on to the competition. However, for me, the most important thing in a competition is to always have access to an instrument so that if I feel like playing, I can. Or if I feel like not playing, I don't need to. But if I only have a piano for 4 hours, from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., I do not like that because I feel very restricted. If I'm not in the mood, how am I actually going to really be able to focus?
So you also adjust your practice time, I guess, to the most focused time of your day, and that probably also changes because you're traveling and also.
Exactly. But I would say that there are two more important things about how I practice. When I practice, I never play something more than 3 times. I'll play a phrase, then I'll stop. I'll think about everything that went wrong in that phrase. I'll think about how to fix everything that went wrong in that phrase. Then I will play it once more perfectly. And then I wait and think about how I can make it feel more comfortable. Then I play it a 3rd time. Then I should not need to practice that ever again, that phrase. But that amount of practice is 10 seconds of playing, 2 minutes of silence. 10 seconds of playing, 2 minutes of silence, 10 seconds of playing. So in my 4 hours of practice, I'm actually playing the piano not more than 2 or 2.5 hours. And the other thing is, I do not start playing a piece until I know exactly how I want to play it. I need to be able to think how I want to hear it. I want to know the fingerings, even without touching the piano. And I think that's very important, because also they have shown that visualizing yourself playing your instrument has the same effect on your brain as actually playing it. So you can do your 8 hours of practice, just 4 hours with an instrument and 4 hours thinking your instrument. But you have to imagine absolutely everything. But when you're thinking it, you can't make mistakes. So actually, you practice better.
You cannot injure yourself.
Yeah.
How do you choose the program for the competition? Because you have a really large repertoire.
For me, it's rather hard to choose my repertoire because I do play a lot of repertoire, but also I'm mostly working on my own now. So everybody has a different idea of what I play well. But for a competition, it just has to be something I know I'm going to play perfectly, and I know that it always gets the audience excited. And the most important thing is, the first round of competition is usually some Bach, something technically difficult, and some classical music. The jury knows within 3 seconds of your Bach whether you'll be in the final or not. Whether you play the others well, that just makes sure that you'll get through. But already with the Bach, they will know, because it's about the quality of the sound. So you need to feel very comfortable with what you're playing, because if you make a small sound, they're not going to put you through, because if you are going to play with an orchestra and you play like this, they won't hear you. Hope that helps.
Could it be interpreted that competitions are more for the individual rather than the mass of participants?
It depends what you're looking for. I would say that of the people that I know, 80% of them feel that they have learned a lot from preparing for a competition. So I would say, do go and play a competition. But in terms of between the first round and the final, only 1 or 2 of the finalists will get any benefit from the competition in terms of concerts and contacts.
And I wanted to ask another question, but not exactly about competitions. When you feel like a piece of music or a phrase doesn't come naturally to you, and you don't understand it, what helps you get to the meaning of the piece or the phrase or the composer and the style? What makes you feel the music is yours and get comfortable with it?
This is a very complex question because for me, this is the work of a musician. Even phrases which I feel comfortable with, actually, when I play them in 2 years' time, I will feel much more comfortable with them. Basically, any phrase I'm not talking about modern music, in classical and romantic music, has a normal shape. It has a high point, it has a cadence at the end. So you have to look at what the harmony is. The normal chords are 1, 2, 4, and 5. But if there's a 6, or if there's a flattened chord or a diminished chord, that is where you need to be going towards. Look at the bar's length. Are there 4 bars or are there 5 bars? If there's 4 bars, the high point is normally always on the 3rd bar. But if there's 5 bars, it can be somewhere else. What is the articulation? Are there any notes which come before they're supposed to, or that come afterwards? For example, in the Schubert trio that you played, the first phrase can seem quite boring because we have So how do we make this something? So anytime you have a repeated note, it needs to sound different. Anytime you have a repeated rhythm, it cannot happen in the same way. And the more you experiment, you need to exaggerate and find ways that you really hate of playing a phrase. But actually you might find one that you really like. But if you don't experiment, you won't find them. So instead of, when I'm playing a piece, I don't find a phrasing that I like and I stay with it. No, I play all the phrasings I can, and then I find a few that I like. Then in the performance, I can choose what I want to do. Because music, it's not presentation, it's representation. We are playing something that somebody else has thought of. We don't know what they thought. And any way that we do it is not going to be how they thought it. So if we're trying to play it in a single way, then we're making it something dead rather than something which is alive. Because everything has been recorded perfectly by loads of people now. The only way that we're going to make music live is in the hall, to the people who've come. And if we hear a performance that we've heard before online, we don't want to listen again. So for me, just every single way you can play it, because actually most of them will be right if you control them. A final question? Well, thank you. You've been a very responsive audience, and I hope it's been useful.